The hallway behind the stage smelled of sweat, cologne, and old velvet. The kind of scent that never really left places where legends performed night after night. It clung to the walls like memories, refusing to fade. Dean Martin stood near the dressing room door, jacket half off, tie loosened, cigarette resting untouched between his fingers. From the outside, he looked like the man everyone thought they knew, easy smile, relaxed posture, unbothered by the noise of the world. But inside, something felt wrong. Not loud wrong, quiet wrong. The kind of tension that settles in your chest before you know why. The show had been electric. The crowd laughed when Dean joked, cheered when Frank sang, roared when they shared the stage, like brothers who had conquered the world together. To the audience, nothing had changed. But backstage, the air was different. Conversations cut short when Frank Sinatra walked past. Musicians avoided eye contact. A stagehand dropped a tray of glasses and muttered an apology too fast. Everyone felt it. No one wanted to name it. Dean leaned against the wall, listening. He could hear Frank in the dressing room down the hall, his voice sharp, clipped, nothing like the smooth confidence he delivered on stage. Words snapped like matches being struck. A producer tried to calm him. Someone else suggested giving him space. Dean took a slow breath. He'd known Frank long enough to recognize the signs. This wasn't about the show. It never was. Earlier that evening, there had been a moment small, almost invisible. A joke Dean told on stage. The crowd laughed a beat too long. Frank smiled, but his eyes didn't. To anyone else, it was nothing. To Frank, it felt like something slipping. Control, maybe, or spotlight, or pride. The kind of thing men never talk about, even when it's tearing them apart. Dean stubbed out the cigarette without ever lighting it. He could walk away. He had done that before. He could let time cool things down. He could let managers smooth it over. That was the easy path. But friendship, real friendship, wasn't built on easy exits. The door to Frank's dressing room swung open suddenly. Frank stepped out, jacket off, shirt slightly wrinkled, jaw tight. He stopped when he saw Dean. For a moment, neither spoke. Years of shared stages, late nights, laughter, and loyalty hung between them like an unplayed note. "What was that out there?" Frank said, his voice low but charged. Dean didn't answer immediately. He studied Frank's face, not the icon, not the legend, but the man. The man who carried the weight of expectations heavier than applause. The man who hated feeling second, even for a second. "It was a joke," Dean said finally, calm, almost gentle. "Same kind we've always done." Frank took a step closer. "You let them laugh at me." Dean shook his head slowly. "They laughed with us. Same as always." Frank's hand clenched into a fist. Not aimed. Not yet. The hallway seemed to narrow, the walls pressing closer, as if the building itself wanted to listen. Somewhere down the hall, a piano played softly. Someone practicing scales, unaware that something fragile was cracking nearby. "You think I didn't feel it?" Frank snapped. "You think I don't know when a room shifts?" Dean met his gaze without flinching. "I think you're tired," he said. "And I think tonight hit harder than it should have." That was the wrong thing to say. Frank's temper, fueled by pressure, ego, and fear he'd never admit, boiled over. The shove came first, sudden, sharp. Dean stumbled back a half step, surprise flashing across his face, more than pain. Then came the punch. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just raw emotion spilling out of control. The hallway went silent. Dean felt the impact along his jaw. The dull thud echoing in his head. For a split second, everything slowed, the sound of blood rushing in his ears. The shocked faces of crew members frozen in place, the piano stopping mid-note down the hall. This was the moment where everything could end. Dean straightened slowly. He tasted iron. His first instinct was human, instinctive anger rising, fists tightening, pride screaming to strike back. He was strong enough. Capable enough. No one would blame him. Everyone was watching. Frank's chest rose and fell. The punch had shocked him too. The anger was already giving way to something uglier. Regret, mixed with stubborn refusal to apologize. Dean looked at him. Really looked at him, and then he did the one thing no one expected. He laughed, not mocking, not cruel. A soft, tired laugh that cut through the tension like a knife through silk. Dean wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, checked for blood, then looked back at Frank with a half-smile that carried more sadness than humor. "Well," Dean said quietly, "guess we finally found something we don't rehearse." The crew didn't know how to react. No shouting. No retaliation. Just that line hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. Frank's shoulders sagged just a little. Enough to notice. Enough to reveal the crack beneath the armor. Dean took a step forward, closing the distance Frank had created with his fist. His voice dropped so only Frank could hear. "You don't need to fight me," Dean said. "Not tonight. Not ever." Frank looked away, jaw working, eyes glassy with something he refused to name. The silence stretched, uncomfortable but necessary. Dean turned to the stunned crew. "Give us a minute," he said calmly. No one argued, as the hallway emptied. Dean stayed where he was, choosing restraint over revenge, loyalty over ego. He didn't know yet that this choice, this single moment of control, would be the reason their friendship survived what should have. Destroyed it, but he felt it. Sometimes the strongest move isn't the one that hits back. Sometimes it's the one that refuses to hit at all. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt heavier than it should have been, a dull click that sealed the room off from the noise. The witnesses, the history, waiting just outside. Inside Frank's dressing room, the air was thick and unmoving, heavy with the scent of aftershave and old cigars, of nights that had once ended in laughter but now ended in something far more dangerous truth. The mirrors around the room reflected the same image again and again. Two men who had conquered stages and cities. Now standing several feet apart like strangers who didn't know how to cross the space between them, Frank turned his back first. That alone told Dean everything. Anger was easier to show than shame, but turning away that was surrender trying to disguise itself. Dean remained where he was, one hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, jaw still aching, not from the punch, but from the words he hadn't said. He could feel the silence pressing in, begging to be broken by accusations, by raised voices, by the kind of argument that would justify the violence that had already happened. Instead, Dean waited. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time behaves strangely in moments like these, stretching and shrinking without permission. Frank stared at his own reflection in the mirror, his eyes locked onto a version of himself he didn't recognize anymore. The man looking back at him wasn't the unstoppable force the world adored. He looked tired, older, fragile in a way applause could no longer hide. "You think you're better than me?" Frank said suddenly, his voice low, almost hollow. Dean didn't answer right away. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if any sudden motion might shatter what little control remained in the room. He picked up a glass from the table, noticed it was empty, set it back down. Only then did he speak. "No," Dean said softly. "I think you're afraid." The word landed hard. Frank spun around, eyes flashing. "Don't psychoanalyze me," he snapped. "You don't get to do that." Dean met his glare, unwavering. "Someone has to," he replied. "Because everyone else is too busy telling you how perfect you are." Frank scoffed, pacing the room now, hands running through his hair. "You don't know what it's like," he said, voice rising. "Every night, every show, people waiting for me to fail, to age, to slip. One bad moment, and they'll say I've lost it." Dean watched him, the anger, the fear, the exhaustion, colliding inside a man who had built his life on being untouchable. "You think I don't feel that?" Dean asked quietly. "You think jokes protect me from time?" Frank stopped pacing. His shoulders sagged, just a little. "Then why did you do it?" he demanded. "Why push the laugh?" Dean stepped closer now, close enough that Frank couldn't pretend this was about rivalry. "Because laughter keeps us human," he said. "And because I thought you trusted me enough to know I'd never humiliate you." That word "trusted" hit harder than the punch had. Frank's jaw tightened, but his eyes betrayed him. For the first time, the anger drained, leaving something raw and exposed beneath it. "I don't trust anyone when the lights go down," Frank muttered. "That's when the doubts get loud." Dean nodded slowly. "That's when you hit me?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was honest. That made it unbearable. Frank closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, though he refused to let the tears fall. "I didn't mean to," he said. "I just snapped." Dean leaned back against the table, folding his arms not defensively, but to steady himself. "You know what scared me?" he said. "Not the punch. The fact that you thought I'd fight you back." Frank looked at him, confused. "Why wouldn't you?" "Because then we'd be two men trying to prove something that doesn't matter anymore," Dean replied. "And I'd lose you for good." The room went quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not threatening, reflective. Like the pause between verses in a song that mattered, Frank sat down heavily in the chair. Elbows on his knees, head bowed. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted. "The pressure. The need to be the best. If I slow down, I feel like I disappear." Dean moved closer, resting a hand briefly on Frank's shoulder, steady, grounding. "You don't disappear," he said. "You evolve. And the people who love you don't leave just because the spotlight shifts." Frank let out a shaky breath. "I hurt you." Dean shrugged lightly. "I've had worse nights," he said, then grew serious. "But don't let this be one of those moments you bury under success. Face it. Own it." Frank swallowed hard. His voice barely carried. "I'm sorry." The word was small, but it carried years of pride breaking open. Dean smiled, not the showman's grin, but something real. "That," he said, "took more strength than that punch ever did." Frank looked up, searching Dean's face for judgment, for resentment. He found none. Only understanding. Only loyalty that hadn't wavered even when tested. Outside the dressing room, the building hummed back to life. The piano resumed. Laughter echoed faintly from down the hall. The world moved on, unaware that something precious had nearly been destroyed and quietly saved. Dean picked up his jacket, slipping it on. "Come on," he said. "They're waiting for us." Frank hesitated. "After what I did, you still want me out there with you?" Dean opened the door, letting the noise spill back in. "Always," he said. "But next time you feel like swinging, talk first." Frank managed a weak smile. "Deal." As they stepped back into the light together, no one could see the fracture that had almost ended everything. What they could see was two men standing side by side, not as rivals. Not as legends, but as friends who had survived the hardest test of all, choosing empathy over ego when it mattered most. And that choice would echo far longer than any applause. The applause outside hadn't faded yet, but inside the car, the silence was complete. The engine hummed softly as the city lights slid past the windows like distant stars, blurred and unreachable. Dean sat in the passenger seat, hat tilted low, eyes forward. Frank drove with both hands, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles pale, jaw locked. They had walked off the stage together, smiled for the cameras, bowed like nothing in the world had cracked Backstage, but the truth rode with them now, heavy and unresolved. Neither spoke. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because what remained was far more dangerous than anger. It was consequence. By morning, rumors would crawl through dressing rooms and studios. By afternoon, whispers would turn into headlines. A punch didn't need witnesses to become a story. Hollywood had a way of inventing the rest. And when stories grew, they didn't care about truth. They cared about blood. Frank broke the silence first. "They'll hear about it," he said flatly. Dean nodded once. "They always do." Frank exhaled sharply, one hand leaving the wheel to rub his face. "I've spent my whole life controlling the narrative," he said. "One mistake, and suddenly I'm the villain." Dean turned to look at him now. "You're not afraid of being the villain," he said. "You're afraid of being alone." The car slowed at a red light. Frank didn't argue. That was how Dean knew he was right. At the hotel, they entered through a side door, heads down, avoiding eyes. Inside Dean's suite, the city hummed below like a restless audience waiting for the next act. Frank stood near the window, staring out, shoulders tense. "I keep thinking," Frank said quietly, "that one day you'll wake up and realize you don't need me anymore." Dean laughed softly, not amused but sad. "You think I stayed all these years because I needed you?" he asked. "I stayed because I chose you." It landed hard. Frank turned slowly. "Then why does it feel like I'm always about to lose you?" Dean walked to the bar, poured water, slid a glass toward Frank. "Because you don't believe anyone stays unless they're afraid to leave," he said. "And that's not how friendship works." Frank didn't touch the glass. "I've watched people disappear the moment I stumbled," he said. "Managers, friends, family. They love the legend, not the man." Dean leaned back against the counter. "Then let them go," he said. "But don't mistake me for them." The words should have ended the conversation. Instead, they opened a deeper wound. The next day proved how fragile everything truly was. A producer called Dean early, voice tense, careful. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." By noon, Dean was sitting across from men in tailored suits who spoke in soft tones and measured sentences. They didn't accuse. They suggested. That was worse. "Frank's temper is becoming a concern," one of them said. "We're thinking long-term. Brand protection." Dean felt his jaw tightened. Not from pain now, but from instinct. "Say what you mean," he said. Another man folded his hands. "Distance yourself," he said calmly. "Just for a while, publicly." Dean stared at him. "You want me to abandon him?" "You want you to protect yourself," the man replied. "One bad incident can sink a career." Dean stood slowly. "Then let mine sink," he said. The room went still. "Dean," the first man warned. "This is business." Dean met his gaze without blinking. "No," he said. "This is loyalty." He walked out before they could respond. That night, Frank found him sitting alone in the lounge. Lights low, music soft. One look at Dean's face told him something had changed. "They talked to you," Frank said. Dean nodded. "They want me to step away." Frank's chest tightened. "You should," he said quickly. "Too quickly. I don't want to be the reason you lose anything." Dean looked up sharply. "That's the fear talking," he said. "Not you." Frank swallowed. "And if they're right?" he asked. "If I am the problem?" Dean stood, closing the distance between them. His voice was calm but unyielding. "Then we face it," he said. "Together, or not at all." Frank's eyes burned. "You'd risk everything for me?" Dean didn't hesitate. "Already did." The weight of that choice settled over the room. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent to the quiet war being fought inside one man's heart, for the first time. Frank understood something that terrified him more than losing fame. Losing the one person who saw him without the spotlight and stayed anyway, and that realization forced a question he could no longer outrun. Was he willing to change? Not for the world, but for the friend who refused to leave him behind. The answer would decide everything. The morning came quietly, almost apologetically, as if the city itself knew it was walking into something fragile. Sunlight crept through the curtains in thin, hesitant lines, tracing the edge of the carpet, the arm of a chair, the rim of an untouched glass on the table. Dean had been awake for hours. He sat near the window, coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the streets below fill with people who had no idea how close to lives had come to breaking apart and how much courage it took to hold them together. The phone rang. Dean didn't jump. He had been waiting for it. The voice on the other end was calm, practiced, careful in the way people speak when they already believe they're right. Offers were made again. Softer this time. A pause here, a solo appearance there, a temporary adjustment that would look like growth instead of retreat. Dean listened without interrupting. When the voice finally stopped, he spoke with a steadiness that surprised even him. "No," he said. "If you want me, you take him too." The line went quiet. Then the voice sighed. "You're choosing the harder road." Dean looked out at the city, at the thousands of tiny lives moving forward despite their own private disasters. "The easier one never changed anyone," he replied, and hung up. He exhaled slowly. That was it. The last door closed. Whatever came next would come honestly or not at all. Across town, Frank sat alone in his suite, the television on mute, headlines flickering across the screen. He didn't need sound to read fear. His name sat there, clean and bold, paired with words that suggested trouble without proof. He felt the old instinct risen eye, dominate, deflect. He reached for it like a familiar weapon, and then he stopped. For the first time in his life, Frank did nothing. He turned the television off and sat in the silence, letting it speak. It spoke of exhaustion, of nights fueled by pressure instead of joy, of friendships strained by ego, of a man who had learned to fight the world but had never learned to lay the armor down. When Dean knocked, Frank didn't pretend not to hear. The door opened slowly. They stood there, facing each other without applause, without cameras, without a script to protect them. Dean took in the room the untouched bed, the drawn curtains, the weight in Frank's posture. "You look like you haven't slept," Dean said. Frank gave a humorless smile. "I finally stopped running," he replied. They sat, no drinks. No jokes, just truth laid bare. "They asked you to leave me," Frank said quietly. Dean nodded. "They asked me to leave us." Frank closed his eyes. The shame came fast, hot, undeniable. "You shouldn't have said no," he whispered. "I don't deserve that kind of loyalty." Dean leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's the thing about loyalty," he said. "You don't earn it by being perfect. You keep it by being honest." Frank's voice trembled. "I'm scared, Dean, not of losing fame, of losing myself. I don't know who I am when I'm not fighting." Dean held his gaze. "Then let this be the fight you choose," he said. "Not against me. Not against the world. Against the part of you that thinks pain is the only proof you're alive." The words didn't heal everything. They didn't fix the past, but they cracked something open, something that had been sealed for too long. Frank stood and walked to the mirror, studying the man staring back. He saw strength there, yes, but also fatigue, fear, a hunger for peace he had never allowed himself to want. "I don't want to hurt people anymore," he said, "especially the ones who stay." Dean rose, joining him. "Then don't," he said simply. "Start now." Frank turned, eyes wet but steady. "If I stumble again?" Dean cut him off. "Then I'll be there," he said. "Not to excuse you, to remind you." They shook hands, at first formal, restrained. Then, without planning it, they pulled into an embrace that carried years of shared history. Bruises unseen, laughter remembered, and promises unspoken until now. Later that night, they walked onto the stage together again. The audience saw confidence, chemistry, legends doing what legends do. They didn't see the choice that had been made in quiet rooms. They didn't hear the vows spoken without witnesses. But something was different. Frank sang with restraint, not force. Dean watched him with pride, not protection. And when the show ended, they didn't rush off to separate corners of the world. They walked out side by side. Because friendship, when tested by fire, doesn't survive through denial or dominance, but through humility, accountability, and the courage to change when walking away would be easier. That night didn't save a career. It saved two men from becoming strangers to themselves. And that was the greatest encore either of them would ever give.